Production title: The Groom Refused to Marry the Poor Black Waitress. What the Korean Mafia boss did next shocked the entire city. Chapter 1. The ceremony of erasure. Ada had ironed the dress herself. This was the detail she would return to later in the hours after, not the flowers she'd chosen, not the guest list she'd memorized, not the 18 months of accommodation and compromise and deliberate grace. The dress. She had stood in her studio apartment at 6 a.m., ironing a dress she'd bought with 4 weeks of tip money, and she had believed in that ordinary morning moment that she was hours away from something real. The Grand Meridian's ballroom held 300 people with room for the kind of ease that expensive space produces. Ada had waitressed this room 47 times. She knew its acoustics, its sight lines, the way the chandeliers made everyone look like the best version of themselves. She had never stood in it as a guest. She had worn the ivory dress and the low heels she'd practiced walking in, and she had felt, navigating the round tables toward the seat assigned to her by a seating chart she had not been consulted about, the particular vertigo of occupying a space from an unfamiliar angle. She should have read the seating chart more carefully. Her table was at the outer ring. The Reid family, Callum's parents, his brother, the aunts and cousins and business partners, occupied the inner constellation closest to the head table. She was at the edge of the solar system, seated between two colleagues of Callum's she had never met, who smiled at her with the cautious warmth of people who had been briefed on a situation and were uncertain how to perform neutrality. She had been reading the room for 20 minutes when Callum picked up the microphone. He had the easy confidence of a man at a podium, the practiced pause, the slow survey of the crowd, the smile that arrived slightly before the warmth did. He thanked the caterers, he thanked his parents, he thanked the hotel. He was very good at this. Ada had always known he was very good at this. "I also want to take a moment," he said, his voice carrying perfectly in the chandelier acoustics, "to address something that I think a number of you have been curious about, the nature of this relationship." A pause, a smile that didn't move far enough to reach his eyes. "Some of you know Ada, some of you have questions, and I think transparency is the right policy." Ada went still. Not the ordinary stillness of someone listening, the specific stillness of someone who has just identified the shape of an oncoming thing and is deciding in the half-second available how to meet it. "Ada is a wonderful person," Callum said, and the but was audible before he said it. "But I think we've both come to understand that wonderful isn't always sufficient. There are practical considerations, family considerations, questions of compatibility that go beyond the personal." Another pause, this one longer, theatrical. "I think we both know that a waitress and a Reid are not, fundamentally, a sustainable equation." 300 people stopped breathing at slightly different rates. Ada did not move. She had been practicing this, not for this specific moment which she had not predicted, but for the general category of this moment which she had been rehearsing her whole life. The chin level, the gaze fixed on a neutral point, the decision to keep the blood in her face regardless of where her chest wanted it to go. "It's not about who you are," Callum continued, with the particular kindness of a man who has mistaken cruelty for honesty. "It's about what this family is, what this name is. And I think everyone here can understand that some distances simply cannot be bridged by goodwill alone." She heard the sound the crowd made. It was not gasping and it was not silence. It was something in between, a collective intake, a held rearrangement, the sound of 300 people deciding in real time whether they were watching a tragedy or a social correction, and feeling the particular discomfort of not yet knowing. At table 7, which Ada could not see from her position and would not have been attending to even if she could, a man set down a champagne flute with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to do something faster. He had been watching her since the seating arrangement had placed her, alone, at the orbit's edge. He had watched the microphone speech begin. He had watched her face through 20 seconds of it. Ryu Jae-won pushed his chair back. He rose without hurry. And in the particular quality of his stillness as he stood, the nearest guests at table 7 felt something change in the air pressure of their immediate vicinity, the way air changes before weather. Chapter 2. The correction. Callum had found his rhythm. This was the dangerous part of men like Callum. They were at their most harmful not when they were uncertain, but when they had committed. He had the microphone, he had the crowd's uncertain attention, and he was using both with the confidence of someone who had decided that the social cost of this moment was, on balance, worth the clarity it would produce. The Reid name represents something, he was saying, his voice warming now, finding the groove of a man who believes he is making sense. It represents a standard, and I would rather be honest now than dishonest later. I think Ada would agree that is incorrect. The two words were not loud. They did not need to be. The quality of the voice that produced them, low, unhurried, possessed of the particular authority of a man who has never once needed volume to be heard, reached every corner of the ballroom in the half-second of silence that Callum's paused sentence had accidentally provided. 300 people turned. Jae-won stood in the space between table 7 and the aisle, one hand resting on the back of his vacated chair. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at Callum with the focused, unblinking patience of someone reading a very short document and finding it less sophisticated than expected. "I'm sorry." Callum's hand tightened on the microphone. "You said the Reid name represents a standard." Jae-won moved from his table into the aisle, his steps deliberate and unhurried on the ballroom floor. "I have been doing business with the Reid Group for 3 years. I have some familiarity with what the name represents." He paused, reaching the end of the nearest row of tables, close enough now that the microphone was almost unnecessary. The Q3 filing discrepancy in the Reid Group's logistics subsidiary. The inventory reconciliation that your CFO corrected before the board review. Someone with a precise and accurate eye identified that discrepancy. He looked for the first time at Ada. "That was your work," he said. "Not a question." Ada blinked. In the middle of the worst moment she had experienced in a room she had waitressed 47 times, she found herself, absurdly, processing a factual question. "Yes," she said, her voice entirely steady, because her voice was the last thing she would give this room the satisfaction of hearing break. Jae-won looked back at Callum. "The woman you are currently characterizing as an unsustainable equation identified a $14 million error in your family's own company before your own financial team did." A pause, while working a weekend shift at this hotel. Another pause, lighter, surgical. "I am curious what standard, specifically, you believe she has failed to meet." The silence had a different quality now. It was no longer the held breath of people watching a social correction. It was the silence of a room that has just recalibrated which direction the correction is moving in. Callum's confidence had the half-life of a man who is used to being the most powerful person in a room and has just realized he is not. This is a private family matter," he said, with less conviction than the sentence required. "You used a microphone," Jae-won said mildly. "In a room of 300 people, the privacy window has passed." He turned, finally, to look at Ada directly, and the quality of his attention, she would think about this later, was like every other person in the room looking at her suddenly adjusting their prescription. Not pity, not even protectiveness. Something more precise than either, recognition. "Ms. Okafor, I apologize for the interruption. I want you to know that the interruption was not on your behalf. You were managing this with more composure than the situation deserved. It was on behalf of accuracy. I find inaccuracy, particularly at this scale and volume, difficult to sit through." Ada held his gaze. 30 years of absorbing other people's assessments of her had given her an excellent ability to distinguish between the ones that were true and the ones that were performances of truth. What she saw in his eyes was the former, uncomplicated, offered without an agenda she could identify. "Thank you," she said. It was not gratitude for rescue. It was gratitude for precision. He seemed to understand the distinction. The contract actually says Callum found his footing again, the way men with money and audiences tend to on the ground of grievance. "I don't know who you think you are," he said into the microphone, the entitlement in his voice now visible as the scaffolding beneath the charm. "But this is my event, my family, and your debt position." Jae-won reached into his jacket and produced a single folded document. He didn't unfold it, merely held it so Callum could identify the Reid Group letterhead. The Ryu Foundation holds 63% of the Reid Group's primary operating debt. The covenant agreement, which your father signed 4 years ago and which your CFO reviewed last quarter, contains a conduct clause. A pause of the same temperature as a closed window. I have been patient with that clause. I am reassessing that patience. The blood left Callum Reid's face in a way that was. The 300 guests would later tell various versions of this story. Almost cinematic, Jae-won refolded the document. He put it back into his jacket. He did not look at Callum again. He looked at Ada. She is mine, he said 3 words. No performance. No raised voice, no dramatic pause before or after. Just a fact, stated with the same quiet certainty he had used to identify the audit discrepancy. The same register a man uses when he is correcting a record that has been wrong for too long and is simply now being set right. The ballroom processed this in waves, the way all impossible things are processed. First disbelief, then the recalibration of context, then the dawning, spreading understanding that the social order of the evening had just been permanently rearranged. Ada's mind moved through what had just happened the way it moved through a balance sheet, systematically, without panic, establishing what was real and what required verification. She looked at Jae-won. He was still looking at her with the same quality of patient, unhurried attention he had used from the moment he stood at his table. "You don't know me," she said, and her voice was steady and honest and genuinely curious. Not a protest. An audit. "Know your work," he said. "I know you identified a $14 million error that your own firm's lead analyst missed. I know you stood at the front of this room for 6 minutes while a microphone was used against you and did not once give that room the satisfaction of seeing you diminish." He held her gaze. "I know that the specific quality of composure you demonstrated tonight is not performed. It is constructed, over time, from materials that were not chosen for you." A pause. "I recognize the construction. I spent 15 years building the same thing." Ada's chest moved with something she did not immediately name. Not relief, she had not been waiting to be saved. Not gratitude, she had been managing before he stood. Something closer to the feeling of seeing a sum that has always been off finally balance. The quiet, almost physical satisfaction of an accurate number. She looked at the ivory dress she had ironed at 6 a.m. She looked at the seat at the outer ring of the room where she had been placed, alone, at the edge of the solar system. She looked at Callum, who was speaking into a now irrelevant microphone to a crowd that had stopped listening to him and was watching her. She stood. She picked up her small clutch. She crossed the ballroom, not rushing, not performing a walk, simply moving from one place to another with the unhurried intention of a woman who has decided where she is going, and she stopped beside Jae-won. "I'm not a transaction," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. "No," he agreed at the same volume. "Transactions are entered into for what they produce. I am not interested in what you produce. I am interested in what you are." He offered his arm in the formal, slightly old-fashioned way of a man who knows the difference between possession and respect. "There is a dinner in the private room, better food and considerably fewer people. I would like the company of someone who actually understands the documents on the table." Ada looked at his arm. She looked at him. Then she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, because she was a woman who knew an accurate number when she encountered one, and she had no policy of refusing accuracy when it finally arrived. Chapter 4: What Miriam found in the kitchen 3 floors above the ballroom, where Ada Okafor was placing her hand in the crook of Ryu Jae-won's arm. Miriam was not breathing. She had been not breathing for 4 minutes, which she knew because she had counted her own pulse. A skill she had developed not from any medical training, but from 6 years of working in a household where the air quality changed without warning, and you learned to monitor your own internal weather. Thomas Reid, Jae-won's silent business partner, brother to Callum's father, the man who had brought the black crane into the family's orbit and now, tonight apparently, was in the process of being removed from it, sat on the closet floor beside her with the careful stillness of a man who has been told by the woman hiding him that any sound will end them both and has chosen to believe her. His breathing was shallow. Not from fear, she thought, though fear was present. From the stomach pain that had been worsening for 6 months, that his physicians kept attributing to stress, and his wife kept attributing to his own excess, that Miriam had been attributing since the 3rd week of watching to the morning tea. Outside the closet door, she could hear 2 sets of footsteps. Callum's mother, Esty, heels precise, the gait of a woman who treats her own home like a stage, and Marcus, Thomas's younger brother, whose footsteps had the particular rhythm of a man moving through a space he believes he is about to own. "Is it done?" Marcus's voice low, "Sir. The dosage tonight was enough," Esty said. Her voice had the quality of a woman discussing a difficult but necessary household correction. "He'll have another episode in the morning. Dr. Key will call it cardiac. He's already been briefed on what to expect." Thomas made a sound that was not a word, and Miriam pressed her palm flat against his arm, not roughly, but with the unmistakable pressure of someone saying, "I know. Not now." She reached into her uniform pocket. The first vial she held up to the crack of light was small, barely 2 inches, with a residue that had dried to a white crystalline crust along the interior. She tilted it so Thomas could see, and his eyes, already too bright with what she now understood was not just stress, fixed on it. Her lips moved. No sound. She had rehearsed this. "I have been cleaning your kitchen for 6 years. 3 months ago, Mrs. Esty began preparing your tea herself. She locked the kitchen during prep. She told me she wanted privacy. She produced a second vial from the other pocket. This one sealed with a strip of medical tape, the residue inside identical to the first. I collected this from the sink drain," she mouthed, 4 separate occasions. Whatever she was washing away, she was not thorough enough. "I sent a sample to a lab in the next county." Her jaw tightened. "The result came back in 10 days." Outside, Esty's footsteps moved closer. "Miriam has been watching too carefully," she said. A pause. "She'll need to be managed. After generous severance," Marcus said. "Make it clean." Miriam held Thomas's gaze in the near darkness, and he looked at her, this woman who had brought him tea when he was tired and found his glasses when he mislaid them, and said good morning to him every day for 6 years while his family built the architecture of his death around him. And she saw in his face the specific, complicated grief of a man understanding, too late, who in his life had actually been paying attention. She held up her phone. One text, drafted and ready. Ryu Jae-won. "The Reid estate. Come now. Bring your lawyer. There is evidence and a witness and a man who is alive but requires that to remain the case." Thomas looked at the text. He looked at her. He nodded. She sent it. Chapter 5. The accurate accounting. Jae-won's car arrived at the Reid estate in 11 minutes. His lawyer arrived in 14. His personal physician, the one who operated in a professional range that did not require explaining to authorities, arrived in 19. By the time the city's organized silence had been arranged around the estate, Thomas Reid had been examined, stabilized, and relocated to a private medical facility that was not affiliated with any institution his family's money touched. The vials were in a chain of custody evidence bag that would reach, by morning, 3 separate legal teams, including one that reported directly to the state attorney general. Esty Reid and Marcus Reid were in separate rooms of their own home, speaking to lawyers who had been selected for them by people who were very good at selecting lawyers for people who were not, in fact, in a position to choose. Miriam sat in the estate's kitchen, her kitchen, the room she had moved through every day for 6 years, cataloging and waiting and protecting a man who hadn't known he was being protected, and drank a cup of tea she had made herself, because she had earned it, and because the kitchen was hers until someone told her otherwise, and no one was currently in a position to tell her otherwise. She had one more thing to give. She produced it from the inside pocket of her uniform jacket, a single folded letter, handwritten, addressed to Thomas in her careful block print. She placed it on the kitchen table. Inside, every date, every observation, every measurement, every lab result. 11 weeks of evidence laid out in chronological order with the precision of a woman who had understood, from the moment she began collecting it, that it would only matter if it was organized well enough to be irrefutable. She had not been a maid in that kitchen. She had been the only person in that household doing accurate work. Ada found Jae-won at 1, 17 a.m. in the private dining room the hotel maintained for guests who required discretion. He was at the table with 2 documents spread before him and a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked up when she came in, and the specific quality of his attention, that focused, accurate regard that had stopped her ballroom retreat cold 5 hours ago, was the same in the 1 a.m. light as it had been under the chandeliers. She sat across from him without waiting to be asked. She had stopped waiting to be asked to occupy rooms a long time ago. "Thomas will recover," he said. "I know. Your assistant told me." She looked at the documents on the table. "And the estate, the debt position the Ryu Foundation holds becomes in the morning a controlling interest. The Reid Group's board meeting has been rescheduled for next week." He paused. "There are openings on the audit committee. Significant openings, given the circumstances." Ada looked at him. "Is that an offer?" "It is an observation," he said, "that a person with a precise and accurate eye for $14 million discrepancies would find the audit committee's current work both interesting and consequential." He held her gaze. "Whether that person would like to be on the committee is a separate question that I am not in a position to answer. That's a very careful way of offering something," she said. "I find it useful to be careful." A pause. "I also find it useful to be direct, so, yes, it is an offer. The position pays significantly more than a weekend waitressing shift. The hours are worse and the people are variable. But the work is real and it matters, and you would be doing it with the full knowledge that you are there because you are the most qualified person for it. Not as a correction to someone else's error. As an accurate accounting of what you actually are." Ada was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the city stretched its grid of lights to the horizon. Somewhere in it, in a private facility whose address she did not know, a man was alive because a woman who had been treated like furniture had been paying extraordinary attention for 3 months. Somewhere in the hotel's grand ballroom, the remains of a reception were being cleared by the staff she knew by name, the people who had always known her by name, who had watched her cross the room tonight in an ivory dress and felt, she suspected, the complicated pride of seeing one of their own navigating a territory that had not been designed for her arrival. She thought about the dress. She thought about the iron at 6 a.m. She thought about Callum's voice through a microphone and the specific quality of the silence that had followed Jae-won's first 2 words. She thought about the fact that she had a finance degree finishing in 4 months and a brain that had always, even in the rooms where no one was looking, been doing the real work. "The audit committee," she said. "I want to see the terms in writing." Jae-won slid one of the documents across the table. She picked it up. She read it, actually read it, all of it, every clause, with the focused attention of someone who has learned that the details of a document are where the truth lives, not the summary. When she reached the end, she looked up. "This paragraph," she said, placing her finger on a clause midway down the 2nd page. "The non-compete scope is too broad. It would prevent me from finishing my degree program's capstone with an external firm. I need it narrowed to direct competitors only." Jae-won looked at the clause. He picked up a pen and crossed it through, wrote a revision above it in a hand that was precise and slightly compressed, and slid it back. Ada read the revision. She nodded. She signed. He signed. In the Grand Meridian at 1 a.m., with the city outside and 2 documents on the table, and the quiet that follows the resolution of a very long and inaccurate accounting, Ryu Jae-won and Ada Okafor shook hands across the table. A formal, unhurried handshake, the kind exchanged between 2 people who understand that what they are beginning is not a transaction, but a different kind of contract entirely. One measured not in what each party produces for the other, but in the rarer currency of people who have each spent too long in rooms that could not see them clearly, finally doing business in accurate light. The end. Next, please subscribe.